Hi, welcome to the Women's Health Podcast. I'm Anthony Lowe, the physio detective.
And I'm Marika Hart from Herasphere. Together we interview leading authorities, we answer questions and share our thoughts to provide the general public with the best quality information that we can find on all aspects of women's health. Please remember that the materials and the content on this podcast are intended as general information and they're for entertainment purposes only.
They're not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis or treatment. Now sit back, grab your favourite beverage or do your thing and enjoy the show. We are now live.
I wish I could. Oh, we're live. Okay.
We are, just letting you know.
No singing. No singing.
Well, you can. We go da 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 with our theme song. But welcome to the podcast, Amy, and welcome, Marika. Nice to have you all on.
It's so nice
to
see
me.
the both of you. I wish we were in person.
Oh, that would be so good.
That would be good. We've Melbourne is our common connection, really, for all of us, right? Well, not for all of us, but as in Marika spent time with you in Melbourne. I've spent time with you in Melbourne and in Brisbane. So, it's been good.
Maybe Mish is our... Yeah, you should. Mish is our common connection, I think.
Yes.
The amazing Michelle Wright, for anyone who does not know her.
Yeah, the Women's Health and Fitness Summit. I think it's episode 6 or something on our podcast.
Is it?
Yeah.
Congratulations. Happy 6th birthday. If you could say 6th birthday. I don't know. Happy 6th episode.
No, Mish was our 6th. What are we now? 40?
42, I believe.
Oh, sorry. Oh, you've had Mishy on and I haven't heard it. I'll have to go back and listen to that one.
No problems. It was a day for women by women.
Nice.
It was about that one. Cool.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Amy, and what you do and your background, and we can go from there.
Okay, thank you. So I am Amy Dawes and I am the co-founder of the Australasian Birth Trauma Association. Our charity was established in 2016 and when actually launched in 2017, and we support families that have been affected by birth-related trauma. So that could be psychological trauma and or physical trauma, such as physical injuries from childbirth. And I think that's probably why you've got me on today, because it's June 2020 and it's actually not international, it's a bit of a mouthful, but POP Awareness Month. And so I will assume that your listeners probably know what POP is, but it's Pelvic Organ Prolapse Awareness Month. And I only found out that it was Pelvic Organ Prolapse Awareness Month about 2 weeks ago. And at the time I thought, I don't know if we can do anything about it. Yeah, because we have Birth Trauma Awareness Week, but Birth Trauma Awareness Week has been put back till September because of COVID-19. And I thought about it and I thought, well, POP is really the reason that I'm so passionate about doing the work that we do for ABTA, because that's my own personal story. So if you want, I'll share a little bit of that with you guys.
That would be amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So in 2013, I had my first child and she was a forceps delivery. I was diagnosed with pelvic organ prolapse at 16 months postpartum. Up until then, I had really felt like perhaps things would get better with time. At the birth, I was told that I'd sustained a 3rd degree tear. So I definitely didn't feel okay in my body, but I just thought with time and maybe some gentle exercises, I would improve. And then actually at 16 months postpartum, I did something called a mindful triathlon. And that's when you do a 5K run, 90 minutes of yoga and 15 minutes of meditation. And I did the first run that I've ever done after having my daughter. And I thought, I did so brilliantly, like I smashed it out, even though I hadn't run for ages. But it was after that run that I felt this sort of uncomfortable sort of dragging sensation, which I now know to be a prolapse. I booked in to see a pelvic health physiotherapist straight away. And it was then that I was diagnosed with a bilateral avulsion and subsequent prolapses. Having trained as a personal trainer and working in sort of health and wellness, I had never heard of prolapse. And so I quickly concluded, well, I must be the only one then. I'm just this unlucky freak. And I went through this whole period of basically falling apart. I think about 6 months of I just couldn't, I was suddenly faced with restrictions I never really could have dreamt would be possible, because I was told that I shouldn't lift up my daughter. She was 16 months old. I was told that I shouldn't lift over 10 kilos of weight. And in the lead up just before I was pregnant, I was actually training for a fitness competition and I could easily lift my body weight. And so I suppose it was this huge disconnect from the life that I imagined vis the life that was now ahead of me, that at one point I wondered if my daughter would be better off without me, because I really felt like I couldn't be the mum that I had imagined and that I thought she would want from me. So luckily my physiotherapist connected me with a really good psychologist, because I was so distressed in those early stages. You just think, every move that you make, you wonder if it's going to suddenly just make it worse, or it's going to fall out, or you go into ultra worry mode, ultra anxious mode. But also during that time I was connected with other women who had similar interests, that liked sport, liked fitness, but were more progressed in their journey of, I guess, accepting prolapse, because you don't necessarily heal it, you just learn to manage it. And I found that really helpful, because when you go and see a physiotherapist, you go through, you obviously have your appointment, and then you leave your appointment and you have a million other questions, and you might have to wait another 2 weeks until you get to that appointment. We know it's expensive. And so it was really helpful for me to actually be able to connect with another mum and just be like, hey, have you used a pessary? Because suddenly I needed a device to hold my organs inside. So that was really useful in my own sort of journey, I guess. And then when I actually found out the stats of pelvic organ prolapse, and you guys are probably better placed, I believe that it's 50% of women will experience some symptoms of pelvic organ prolapse at some stage during their life. Now, I know that the two key contributors are childbirth and menopause. Probably not a coincidence. Probably they go hand in hand. But I know obviously there's other factors that come into play. But the thing that baffled me with that staggering statistic is that, why isn't anybody talking about it then? Like, why are we not giving each other the heads up? So I think it was from that kind of moment that I thought, well, I want to be a voice for those that are suffering in silence. And that's what it is with pelvic organ prolapse. I always say, because you can't see it, no one knows just how much you're suffering. It's like mental health. In fact, I saw a really good image the other day that sort of summed it up. Whereas, for some women, prolapse is like a disability, but you can't see it. And so you almost wish that you had something like you'd lost a leg, because actually then you might actually get some understanding. But instead, there's this sort of shroud of silence and shame. And I just didn't think that was okay. And I really wanted to speak out. And it's weird because in my former life, I used to sell wine for a living, and I used to get really uncomfortable just presenting to my team of 10. And now I get up in front of hundreds of people and talk about my vagina. And that's how passionate I am about being a voice in this kind of space. And it was then I stumbled across the work of my co-founder, Liz Skinner, and she was doing a PhD of the psychological consequences of physical trauma. And in a way, her work is groundbreaking, because nobody has talked about it. Nobody's actually looked and gone, well, what does this make? How does this impact women? And she happened to go to the UK not long after we'd met, and met the Birth Trauma Association in the UK. And when she came back from that trip, she said to me, I wish there was a Birth Trauma Association in Australia. And I thought, I can make that happen. And I basically haven't stopped since. And this is what we do now. So yeah, that's a little bit about my story and why ABTA was founded, and we're really sort of built on this. We've got a kind of a two-pronged approach, which is predominantly we support impacted families, and we do that via peer support. So all our volunteers, we're almost entirely voluntary. So all our volunteers have a lived experience of birth-related trauma. They undergo a weekend training with us, and then they offer peer support via our website through live chat. And we've just actually responded to the needs of the women in our community, which is that they actually want face-to-face support. And we've developed something called the P2P Meets, which is a 6-week face-to-face peer-led program to really enable women to get the stepping stones towards recovery. And so that's kind of where we're at now. But that's the one component of us, which is the support. But also, because we've been working in this space now for 3 years, we can actually use our community to inform the work that we do as well. So we're also starting to slowly move into that preventative space, because we're in such a unique position where we really see what contributes to birth trauma and what birthing families need in order to prevent the huge incidences of birth-related trauma, which is that 1 in 3 women in Australia identify their birth as traumatic, which is a huge statistic in itself, and obviously demonstrates that there is so much work to be done. And I think our organisation is really well placed to start helping more families.
Oh my gosh, I have like a million different directions that I want to go with.
I know, because I went off on loads of tangents.
No. It's thank you first of all for sharing your story. Because we're talking about that sort of birth trauma for you. I mean, you were diagnosed 16 months postnatal. Was that birth, when you look back at it, did it feel traumatic at the time or in the months following?
Yeah, it's such a good question, because this is again, it just goes to show how difficult this territory is to navigate, right? Because I was scared during the birth of my daughter. I mean, at one stage I did think, is my life ebbing away from me? Because they ordered 2 units of blood, and a theatre is a really cold place, so you're shaking, and you've watched movies, and if you're shaking and you need blood, you assume death. And also, I hadn't slept for the whole night prior to going into labour, so I was operating on very minimal sleep, but because it was my first birth, you have nothing to compare it to. So even though it was a scary experience, and probably quite scary to my partner, because he was taken out of theatre so they could repair my perennial tear, everybody told me in recovery, oh, you've done a great job, or you got the birth you want. And so that's a bit of positive reinforcement, so that helps. I was actually in bed for 5 days. I couldn't get out because I was catheterized. I had extensive bleeding, so they had to kind of insert padding, and I was really uncomfortable, but I was really happy that my daughter was safe. And because you don't know, you've got nothing to compare it to, I didn't view being wheeled outside in a wheelchair to get fresh air on day 5 as anything out of the ordinary. It's only obviously in reflection that you think, actually, that was quite scary. But was I traumatized by the birth? No, I don't think I was. I cried a lot because I knew I felt awful, and my body felt completely alien to me. I could hardly walk for about 6 weeks. And interestingly, I was told by one of your colleagues, Robin Kerr, that quite often, if you feel like you've been hit by a bus after you've given birth, that can be a good indication that you've sustained quite significant trauma to, perhaps linking to pelvic floor muscle trauma. But no, my trauma comes really strongly from my diagnosis, because I, like I said to you at the beginning, I just really fell apart when I realized that my quality of life as I knew it had completely changed. And sorry, when I say it's interesting, is that we support lots of women in the community that don't actually view the birth as traumatic, but it is the subsequent injuries that they are now managing that has fed into the trauma.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting difference, because I see both as well, and you see, you know, some women who have really such a traumatic birth experience and PTSD associated with that, but without actually much of the physical side. And then the opposite. And I think it's really important to be able to pick up both of those, isn't it? So that women can get the help that they need in whatever form that is required.
Yeah. And again, it is, I mean, I've been in this space maybe 3-4 years, and nobody really talked about pelvic floor muscles to the degree that we see the discussion taking place now. And even birth trauma is almost now in language, but you're seeing a lot of other organizations attaching that to PTSD, whereas our organization is very much about actually birth trauma has lots of faces. So it has you know, it can impact everybody, birthing women or their partners, both or just one of them. You can get psychological presentations, predominantly anxiety or PTSD or OCD, really commonly misdiagnosed as PND, which is really complex because it means that the treatment just doesn't work the same for PND and PTSD. So it's good to be mindful of that, but also recognizing that there can be some psychological fallout to those diagnoses of injury. And there's an incredible paper that I will share with you after this that has just come out of Sweden, which really delves in deep to the psychological, to the overall view of women that have experienced POP after childbirth and what that impact has on them. And it is for me, it was amazing to read, because it is literally like they've opened up my head and looked at my brain, and it's the first time I've actually ever seen it in a published paper. And it's just a small step to actually recognizing that this is the physical injury side of things is a huge trauma component and should stop being ignored the way it is or has been for so long.
Absolutely, Amy. It's you know, I love how you said that birth trauma is so much more than just the PTSD side of it, for example, and that for you the trauma was actually the diagnosis and everything that went with that diagnosis. You know, that's really important to acknowledge, as Marika has said. It'd be really interesting to hear some of the things that were in that paper that came out of Sweden, and almost as a mental note for myself, I'm going to find the videos that Marika had used. I don't know if you saw Marika's presentation at the Women's Health and Fitness Summit, but I think it would have been
Amy and I were
actually
at the same time.
Yeah.
It was really funny because people were going to both. There were a whole lot of people who wanted to do both, and I had halfway through, and my presentation was on pelvic organ prolapse, diagnosis, language, does language matter, how do we support people through prolapse. Amy's in the room next door. Halfway through my talk, you know, people were like going, either leaving or coming back because they were trying to get to both, which sucked because I really wanted to listen to you speak.
Yeah, I wanted to see yours. So yeah, it did suck.
That was really funny. So Amy, like about 3 or 4 years ago, I did a questionnaire, and in retrospect, I wish to goodness I'd done it properly and actually got, you know, full ethics approval and done a proper qualitative study, because the data that I got out of it is like you say, it's immeasurable because it's people's actual languages, their words. And I asked them questions about how they felt about getting their diagnosis, what their prognosis was, what was the prognosis that was given to them, and how did they feel about that. I asked them about things that they felt helped their prolapse, and a bunch of other questions. But the long and short of it is I did it for me because I wanted to understand women's experiences more so I can better help them. And I got like about 120 women reply to this questionnaire. So it was just amazing. But brilliant. I can tell you that reading these people's stories, I was absolutely bawling. There were women who have tried to take their own lives, who've had marriage breakups, who feel, when you were saying earlier about my child would be better off without me because I'm not a good mum. There was so much pain in these people's experiences, and it really, oh my God, it really hit home for me. And the videos Anthony's talking about, which I can link later, I took some of the statements and I put them into a video with some music and some images for that talk, because I just really wanted health and fitness professionals to understand that when you give this diagnosis, and especially for a lot of these women, they're giving a diagnosis with no hope, with no light at the end of the tunnel. The terminology that was used was just heartbreaking. But for us to really consider how much power our words have on someone's experience with prolapse. And I'm not talking about, saying that it's all fluff and unicorns and rainbows and that kind of bullshit.
No, there's got to be a certain level of realism attached, but also, a fundamental human need is hope. So if you've got an absence of hope, I honestly, I just think to myself, suicide is the leading killer for mums in that first year postpartum. I forget the stat. I should know this stat because I quite often say this. I can't help but think how many women are experiencing the fallout from physical injuries, but they literally feel like they're the only ones, and they feel like there's no hope. And hope is so important. We've just completely overhauled our website to make it. We're trying to also, we don't want people to come and read about levator avulsion and feel like, well, what have I got now? Because it's really important to share the good and the bad. I think for far too long, the bad side of what can not go to plan during birth has been silenced, but we need to have a balance of both. And the hardest thing is that the pushback that we receive as an organization is that you don't want to scare women. But I just really feel so strongly that why it's so crucial that pelvic physiotherapy becomes part of antenatal education, because it empowers women with information, and really it's for me it feels like a missing link of where we can enable physios to come in and hopefully best prepare women for the birth they want, whatever birth that be. But also when things don't go to plan, they've understood that might happen. And of course, you aren't then blindsided by this diagnosis that you didn't even know existed, because you just can't help but think perhaps there could be a lot of trauma prevented. And on the flip side of that, those women, of which again we support lots of women that have ended up in an emergency cesarean situation and they feel like they've failed, and perhaps if they knew a slightly more balanced approach to what happens during birth, maybe they wouldn't feel like they failed, and maybe that they would be able to accept that perhaps a cesarean was a better option for them and their baby. So our organisation as a whole really advocates for improved antenatal education. And it's interesting about what you say about your survey. If you can share the video so that I can share it on our ABTA Facebook page, that would be really helpful. Last year we did a survey during Birth Trauma Awareness Week, but we ran it for the month, which was about birth preparation and how women felt about what the information that they were given when they were preparing for birth. And like you, Marika, I wish that I'd done it properly and got ethics approval and all of this, because we had 402 people respond to that survey, and that has really helped inform us of, I very much wear the lens of physical trauma, but I'm also very mindful of the fact, as I said to you, that trauma has so many faces. So it was really helpful for me to understand other key contributors to birth trauma as a whole. A really prime example that was off my radar was hemorrhaging. It's so common, and nobody talks to you about the fact that it can happen. And then when you hemorrhage, it's that is a huge trigger for trauma. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, and that's kind of how that's informing us as we move into that preventative space. But like you, Marika, we just understand the language and what women are seeing and feeling.
Yeah. And it's so important, with the antenatal side of things, because, there is a push for less medicalized births and decreased cesarean rates. And I take part in antenatal education for the local health service that I'm a part of here. And there is that balance. We don't want to scare women. We don't want to, make them afraid of what might happen. And yet, how do people make an informed decision without information and data and statistics and awareness? And so, empowerment through education and encouragement and support, I think is the most important, which is what we're doing, right? Like, we're trying to raise awareness and trying to help people see and understand what birth trauma is like. One of the things that I'd like to ask you, Amy, is we've spoken about. So you had a perineal tear, which is like a physical trauma. There's a levator avulsion, physical trauma. We talked about the psychological impact of your diagnosis, and that was really that's what you identify as the real traumatic bit about your birth story. We've spoken about hemorrhaging, or you've mentioned hemorrhaging, and the different things that go on, like an emergency cesarean section you've mentioned, and having to, some women feeling like a failure for having to have an emergency cesarean section, for example. What are some of the other what other presentations of birth trauma do you see and are supporting women through in your community?
So I could probably share it with you at some stage. We haven't made the data look pretty, but we did actually do a poll in the private support group, which is perceived contributors to trauma. And it was really interesting because we were able to break it down into different categories. So, for example, physical trauma being one, and then the different types of physical trauma that's associated with that, which is the third, which is tearing, perineal tears, which interestingly we seem to talk about a bit more. Like, women sort of know that they don't want to tear, but the gap in that is that there's, it might be touched upon in antenatal education, but nobody sort of points out, well, what do these tears mean, and what are the impacts that they could potentially have on your life? And I just think that's really unfair, because statistically, Australia has some of the highest rates of third and fourth degree tears in the world, and those tears have the biggest lifestyle complications or contributors to compromised lifestyle. So we broke it down into categories. So we had physical trauma, then we had we could break it down into communication from care providers. That's obviously a massive one. From visible friction between perhaps midwives and obstetricians to women feeling like they're just a observer to their birth and not a participant. So no open communication, and open communication is a really tricky one, in the sense that this is why, again, antenatal education really needs to be improved, because you can't tell women what the risks are while they're in the middle, while they're laboring, which I have actually seen a document that I signed consenting to the forceps delivery. It's definitely my signature. I've got no recollection of signing that. How can you possibly make a judgment call when you're in labour? It's just not, it's not okay. But then other ways of which, particularly a big one for first time mums, is not being believed, so dismissed when they're in labour, and wanting to go to hospital, really not being believed is a huge one that comes
There's
up.
often sort of quite condescending tones, I find too, Amy, when I hear my clients' stories. It's like, oh, there, dear. It's just your first one. You're a bit excited. It's totally, and it's like, well, hang on. Can you at least check me out?
But the reality is, and this is a really sad reality, is that vicarious trauma is a thing. You know, we have got actually very little support for our health professionals or our maternity carers or maternity care providers. So they experience trauma themselves because they are witnessing trauma, and yet they're getting no support either. So you can understand where they become desensitized to other people's needs because they haven't been adequately taken care of. So it's a perpetual cycle which really needs to be broken, and there needs to be more support for our actual care providers. But that being said, sometimes the stories that you hear and the way in which women are spoken to, you know, it is absolutely devastating and heartbreaking. And just how can you just approach a human like that? You know, another big one is having to have a baby in NICU or neonatal intensive care, or the mum needing to be in intensive care as well. Again, it's you know, something that occurs quite frequently, and yet nobody prepares you for it. And again, around language and communication, I'll never forget this woman saying to me that she didn't experience birth trauma, but she had a baby in NICU, and she was really worried about this baby. And one of the nurses was taking her to go and see the baby from her ward, and the nurse was just chatting away to her colleagues as they went to the lift, and she's like, "Oh yeah, Sharon, I'll see you after my shift," while this mum is just trying to hold it together because she is so worried about her baby. And I think just always being with that person, that's their role, isn't it? Be with that person, show kindness, show humanity, and it can go so far. Like, open communication really is what we spoke about it before we actually started talking, is that we need to be really honest, we need to be open-hearted and communicate effectively. So yeah, that's a big one, communication as well. My battery is about to die. Can I go and get a charger? Okay, sorry. I'm looking at it and it's like 2%. Just give me one sec.
It's because it is super important, super important. And if you have any questions and you're watching this video, pop your questions in the Facebook group, pop your questions on the website. And we'll make sure that the questions get to Amy. Anything you can do to support the Australasian Birth Trauma Association is much appreciated as well. And if your country has a local birth trauma association, be sure to let us know who they are. And if you're a part of that, let us know the work that they're doing as well. Pop Awareness Month is obviously a great idea. There's lots of resources and guests that we've had from many different places around the world who understand and have lived through pelvic organ prolapse. So it's fantastic that we've got an adopted Aussie from the UK, from the old dartboard, with us in Australia, doing this with us on the 1st of June. It is the 1st of June.
What? Oh my God.
Yes, it
is. Through this crazy year so far.
You're back.
You're back.
I'm back. It's interesting what you say about other birth trauma associations, because I get contacted a lot by people that want to start one in their own country. There's a birth trauma association in the UK and in Canada. As far as I know, there isn't one in the US, but I know a few women that are really keen to establish one. Obviously, as I said, it really it can impact anybody, so it's far-reaching. And I've been seeing some interesting names come up as following the ABTA Facebook page as well, from Pakistan to India to South America. Like, it's interesting.
There's obviously a need out there. Amy, can we come back to the birth itself? You know, speaking to clients, I find it really interesting that on paper, someone can experience a birth that sounds horrendous. Okay, so I labored for 40 hours. I then, all these things happened. Baby's heart rate dropped. I ended up in theatre having an emergency C-section. Da, da, da. You know, you hear the story, and then when you ask them to reflect on it, you know, how did you feel in that moment? Was it a traumatic experience? Do you need someone to talk? They're like, actually, no, it was fine. I felt really well supported. I was well educated through this whole process. I was given choices. I never really felt out of control. I never really feared for my safety. And they actually haven't experienced much in the way of trauma from that. I just want to know your thoughts on that. So in terms of, you know, what can seem like something that could be really horrendous, or someone hemorrhaging or almost going to die, and then come out and go, actually, no, it wasn't that horrible. Whereas other women who can, on paper, it can, oh, well, I had, you know, a second degree tear, it seemed pretty minor, but had very little in the way of emotional support, who felt judged, who didn't feel that they were being educated or given choices along the way. I just wanted to know, like, your thoughts on that, and how perhaps we can, as a community, do better with this.
Oh my God. I feel like as you're saying that, you're answering your own question, because the example of someone, no, don't be sorry, because I just think it's really interesting, the language that you're using. When you think of someone that's had something that from an outsider's perspective sounds like it could be horrific, but they are saying, you know, I had a good support network. I felt really supported by my care providers. You know, there's a big thing there, supported by my care providers. It seems like such a small thing that you would just expect to happen in a birth setting. Does it happen? You guys know this. It doesn't always happen. And also, again, feeling like they are really part of the process, the birthing process. They were part of that decision making, and perhaps they, you know, well, and then you go to another perspective when you talk about someone that's had what looks like an okay, not too bad experience. I think of one of the very first mentors that we trained for ABTA, and she had what looked like a textbook perfect birth. She had her water birth, and she ended up with PTSD because during that water birth, she has a very clear recollection of feeling something go, and she attributes that to her pelvic floor muscle tearing. And she was really traumatized for her birth for quite some time. But I think it's really important to remember that we all as people come to our experience in the world with our own lenses of whatever we've had before us. And again, it all comes with trauma-informed practice, because there aren't really, when you have a baby, as you well know, Marika, right? You go, they ask you, do you have any existing mental health conditions? You don't actually have to tell the truth. You can say yes, you can say no. Are they going to look into it? Probably not. Do they have the time? No. You know, sexual trauma as well. The stats for women that have experienced some kind of sexual trauma are just, aren't they? I mean, you probably know better than me, but they're pretty horrific.
40% or something, like, it's really high.
It's just, it is so terrifying. So I know, I have actually a really good friend that had experienced sexual trauma when she was 18. She had completely, she thought, dealt with it. And it wasn't until she gave birth to her first child, triggered. You might think that that trauma has gone, you've dealt with it, but trauma, I mean, there's a brilliant book, isn't there, that okay, thanks, Siri. I understand, and hopefully Marika and Anthony do. But there's a book called what is it? The Body Remembers. It's a book I really want to read about trauma. So you might feel like you've put it in a box safe in your head, but your body hasn't forgotten it. So I think it's really, again, it's more work about encouraging our clinicians and our birth workers to be trauma informed and recognize that it's not just who you're seeing in front of you, it's whatever they bring to the table as well.
Yeah, I just did a consult with somebody, and it was interesting because it was for a diastasis consult initially. This is months ago, and and it evolved because she had a traumatic experience, and she hadn't realized that a lot of what her symptoms were, and so I'm talking back pain, pelvic pain, like groin pain, dyspareunia, so pain during sex, pain into the feet, was possibly from her traumatic past, which she thought she'd dealt with. And you know, a lot of the things that you're saying about her childbirth, like she didn't feel in control, like, you know, there was a lot of things about it, and she didn't realize until discussing all of it in a context that actually it is all related. And so, you know, from my point of view, because she wanted to know if she could do some exercise and she wanted to feel strong, like, I mean, that was fine, but I think the major part of the benefit of the consult was actually identifying for herself that actually maybe I should talk to my therapist about this. And you know, I literally got a message just before you jumped on, you know, saying that her back pain is better, and her, you know, still gets pelvic pain every now and then, but much better, you know, pain in the feet better, and she's exercising and she's doing lots of great stuff. It's so important to recognize when, you know, sometimes what people present with isn't necessarily the problem. It's just what they present with, thinking that it's the main problem, and we've got to have that ability to acknowledge and still step back and say, there's something different about this presentation, and allow it to evolve. Really loving all the information that you're giving us. What sort of things? So you've talked about the P2P support network, the training for the mentors, the you know, the resources and the information that you've got, and you're moving into preventative type stuff. What sort of works have you got? What sort of plans have you got for the future for the association? And you know, can you talk to us about what you're hoping to do moving forwards?
It's linking a little bit back to what you were saying about recognizing that what a woman is maybe presenting with, and there may be an underlying thing. The other thing that I think that we want to do as an organization is actually give the power back to the woman, in the sense that it can't be entirely up to a clinician to, you know, be the sleuth. You know, there's a lot more research, for example, going back to sexual trauma, a lot more research that's indicating that there's a link to sexual trauma and birth trauma. But, you know, we still don't necessarily show up and want to be completely vulnerable with our clinician or, you know, care provider. But perhaps if we knew that we were at risk, maybe we would be more willing to share some of the information that we think may be important or relevant for our care providers to know. So that's kind of our angle as we move into the preventative space. As I mentioned, we did the birth preparation survey, and we feel that there's actually a space for us to give the power back, in the sense that we'll provide some information, and birthing women can use it or don't use it. Because, you know, if we go back into the scared scenario, which is the biggest pushback that we get when we raise awareness for the risks involved with vaginal birth, that we're trying to scare women, but actually we're not. We really advocate for individualized and multidisciplinary approach to our care. So not a one-size-fits-all approach to birth, and not one particular model of care. We would actually like to see our health professionals collaborate to get the better outcomes for women. But you know, when we talk about women being scared, we talk about there's always going to be women that are like, I don't want to know the rest. I'll put all my trust into my health professional. But I think that is unfair to assume that every birthing woman is going to be like that. So we have to put the information out there that is currently missing. So for example, I am starting to see a lot of pelvic physios put information around pelvic floor and pregnancy and its function. But up until fairly recently, nobody talked about the pelvic floor function in birth, which to me seems absolutely ludicrous, considering it's quite a crucial component to a physiological birth, a normal physiological birth. So our aim as an organisation is to fill in those gaps of information, but not be the source of information. We will provide a little bit to encourage women to have the conversations that are important to them. And that's what's coming out this June, is our very first pilot of, because I'm trying to not give too much away, because, you know, apparently this area is competitive. I don't know. I'm just like, hi, know everything. Give me some money, because we need money to make this work. But we will release our first pilot, hopefully by the end of this month. And then I'm really hoping that we can get funding to further create a series. And the series is videos. And it was myself as a consumer, a pelvic physiotherapist, an obstetrician and a midwife, and we all came together and we worked as a team to develop this information that we're going to put out. And we really felt like we needed a pilot so that we've got a compelling story, a picture to paint to hopefully get funding, because the organisation as itself, even though we'll be 4 years old this September, we still rely heavily on donations. We've only ever had one grant, and that was to overhaul our website, which has now gone live. And I'm really proud of what it looks like now. So completely different feel to the old site. But other than that, we really operate on a very, very lean budget, and we rely heavily on the time of our volunteers. So yeah, I can't really give away too much, but hopefully I've given away enough that you want to hear more. So watch this space.
And we're happy to have you back to support that project, you know.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Would love to hear about it when the time is right. And
yeah, I can't wait to show you. So close.
Yeah. No, that'll be really exciting, Amy. And, you know, we'll make sure that the links for any donations for the ABTA will be on the website, and we encourage people to donate. And, you know, we really support the work that you do. And,
thank you.
Yeah, it's been fantastic to get to chat to you about such things.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, I don't know if it's the wind-up, but, you know.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, are we going?
Oh. Okay, I thought it was. Okay,
I was thinking, I've got more. I've got more to ask.
Okay, ask away.
Well, no, not tons. I was just, it was more a reflection, really, Amy. I was just thinking when you're talking about having, you know, pelvic floor physio, having a midwife, and having an obstetrician, sorry about the toilet flushing next door.
Don't worry. Having
all of those people involved in this process, I think, is fantastic. And actually, I think it's probably of more benefit than anything that you come into this space in the middle, not coming from one of those camps, to coordinate this, because my experience has been over the past sort of 5 to 10 years is that there is a little bit of battle.
Little bit. I never thought in my wildest dreams that birth could be so political, but oh my goodness, I consider ABTA Switzerland in this process. But
yeah, I was trying to be subtle, but yeah, there's a shit fight going on. We can say.
And I think
everyone has their own agendas. Is I guess where I'm coming from, and I think it's actually, you know, I'm thinking now it's actually really awesome that you are not, you know, a pelvic health physio or a midwife or a gynecological surgeon or an obstetrician, because you have no stake in any of this. Your goal at the end of the day is to support women who have had trauma, and to perhaps get some things done at ground level to actually maybe prevent some of this stuff happening in the future, which I think is really great. So how are you finding the response? I know you said early on there were people who are saying, you know, you're just, you know, what, anti-vaginal birth, and you're anti-forceps, and you're anti-this, and you're scaring people. Do you think and that's not everyone, by the way, that's a small portion of people, but
I haven't had anything for a while, actually, so I should stop that. What's the word?
Narrative?
rhetoric in my mind. Yeah, narrative. Yeah, maybe I should stop that a little bit. I'm sure it's still said, but I haven't seen it said publicly for a while. Yeah.
So I was going to say, what's been the response overall to the ABTA and the services that you're providing from the consumers and also from the healthcare practitioners?
Consumers has been amazing. Like it's really what drives me forward, because I would say once a week I get a lovely email from somebody that has stumbled across our work and said that they thought they were the only one, and it's amazing to know that they're not. But it also saddens me that 6 years on, you know, for example, rotational forceps are still being used. We're not anti-forceps, and in fact, the worst thing I've ever done is probably, it was in the first year of my second daughter's life, which was probably one of the hardest years of my life, because I found it incredibly hard being a mum to two and no family support around, and I'd had no sleep, and it was a CFA conference, and ABC came to interview me at the CFA conference, and the first question they asked was, would you like forceps banned? And I should have been like, not necessarily banned but reduced, but I went yes, and then every newspaper outlet sort of jumped on that. And I think it's really important to remember that, and I'm trying not to use this language so much, but ultimately I am just a mum. I don't understand obstetrics, but you know, and I recognize that in some situations forceps are required. However, they should not be so heavily used. We have huge rates of forceps in Australia, and if there's one contributor to pelvic floor muscle avulsion that could probably be easily removed from the equation, it's forceps. And that much I do understand. And you know, what drives me to volunteer my time and pour my heart and soul into this organization is the women that share our stories with us, that are brave enough to put their names out there to help get birth trauma recognized. Because, you know, for the last 3 years, we've really been waving the flag and saying it's a thing. You need to recognize it, and you need to start thinking about how can we stop it. And so we're now very much in that space of, well, let's find ways in which we can collaborate and hopefully prevent it. So I've got some incredible health professionals that work with us and help us inform or help us put out evidence-based information, which is really important to us. We've just formed a clinical advisory committee where we've got midwives, clinical mental health clinicians, obstetrician, who else have I missed? Oh, physiotherapists, obviously. And so, yeah, they're kind of, you know, up until the start of this year, it was myself, my volunteer manager, Christine Percy, that you guys know. And then at the end of last year, I had an amazing volunteer join us also called Christine, just to make my life easy. It wasn't compulsory, but she found us. But we've operated on an incredibly small team, and now we're starting to formalize that clinical advisory committee and really hopefully get the word out there that we really support families, because we're never gonna, I think we're a long way off stopping birth trauma, but the stepping stones are actually pathways to care, because at the moment they don't really exist. And that's why one of our hashtags is start the conversation, because I think too often people don't actually ask about someone's birth experience because they don't know what to do with the information if they hear something. So we really are looking to collaborate with our key stakeholders, which includes, you know, GPs, child health nurses, pelvic physiotherapists, which incidentally is the community that's most supportive of us. And I really attribute that actually to the fact that you guys really do see the trauma. And I think it's really easy for perhaps our maternity care providers to not actually see the long-term implications of trauma. So, you know, they might do the 2-week visit after, or maybe a 6-week visit, and then maybe they don't ever see them again. And maybe not everybody, because there's awesome clinicians and maternity workers that obviously have people come back and have other children with them, but then there's this whole cohort that will never see this person again. My midwife, because I was in midwifery group practice, so she will never know actually the impact that birth had on my life unless she's picked up the Sydney Morning Herald and seen me in there or something, which would be really weird and probably horrendous. But yeah, so and I honestly think that that's why, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that's why the pelvic physio community has been so supportive of us, because you recognize, like we recognize, that there is a huge need for the work that we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important to raise that awareness, like you said, and to support organisations like yourself. I was thinking, we did start with your story, and we got through to your diagnosis. Do you mind if you tell us how you're going since the diagnosis and where you're up to with all that?
Yeah, I can't say too much, but I have gone on to have a second child. And as I mentioned, I had her via elective cesarean. And whilst it was scary, because I think, you know, obviously my brain will associate an operating theatre to a place where I thought I was going to die. So that was not fun. But for me, it was really helpful to have to know that my care provider would be there throughout, and it would be the same person. Because my midwife, when I had my first, it was her day off when I went into labour. So I didn't actually have her, even though I saw her for the whole of the pregnancy. And I ended up having about 8 midwives on the day of my birth. And only one of them really sort of engaged with me. But so to have that continuity of carer and to actually know when the baby was coming was just so weird. So I'm going in to give birth at 1 o'clock today. It was kind of cool and terrifying at the same time. And then it was incredibly cathartic to be out a week after the birth, pushing Indy in the pram, because you know you hear all this talk about cesareans and you can't drive for 2 weeks, and it's, you know, it's because it's major abdominal surgery. Yeah, it is, but I could push my daughter in a pram a week after, whereas with my first vaginal delivery I couldn't walk for 6 weeks. So that, you know, it's, and then so that was quite good in that sense, but it was still really challenging, the shift from 1 to 2, and that was a tough time for me. And I actually did, in all honesty, go quite downhill mentally, because I think I had worked so hard to work through my diagnosis, and then I was kind of at this good place, and then you get pregnant, and then you have a cesarean, and of course you're not going to walk away from that without some issue, you know, things happening. And I felt that my symptoms were a little bit aggravated, and I had a constant, because my first daughter was really chilled and my second daughter is not chilled. Like, put it this way, my partner was always open to having 3 kids. By day 3 in the hospital, he was like, do you know what, I'm done with 2. I'm done with 2. And I was like, I was done already, so it's cool. But I had constant anxiety of picking her up and making things worse. I really, really found it incredibly hard. And I think we just didn't have this family support. It's just him and I, and obviously he's working. And I think if you've got really good family support around you, great. But if you don't, it's something to consider, because you know, we're not supposed to do this by ourselves, and a lot of us do. But yeah, very, very challenging first year of Indy's life, but also equally I found my purpose, because I was working on ABTA. I was writing the business plan so we could get our charity status when she was 4 weeks old, but we got the charity status. And so you know, when we talk about post-traumatic growth, I feel like perhaps I have encompassed that, because what's happened to me has really given me true purpose. And I'm like happy with that. I love the work that we do, and I get a lot of reward from the work that we do. So
I can imagine those messages from mums would be amazing to receive.
They're from all over the world.
Yeah.
I think I can still say quite certainly that we are one of maybe 2 charities that's actually talking about birth injuries. So there's another charity in the UK called MASIC, which looks after women that have experienced tears, obstetric tears. But I think because we are really one of, 2 that I know of, we have quite a broad global reach, because there's going to be lots of women there that are just like, there must be someone else out here, and luckily we fill in that gap. Don't worry.
Look, it's been a fantastic time with you, and all 3 of us could talk for hours and hours and hours. So I've been given the task of wrapping up and asking for your final words. So we covered right off the start your birth experience and the trauma associated with that. We've covered the many different types of trauma and what the Australasian Birth Trauma Association does, and the great work that you're doing in providing support for those who have had a traumatic birth, the peer support, as well as interacting with a multidisciplinary approach and team, not to be the source of information, but to support those who provide the information and the support for those people who are having, who are going through pregnancy and postnatal issues. We talked about, which I said already, not just the physical trauma of birth, but also the psychological and also the latent effects of previous trauma being possibly triggered, and subsequent pregnancies, and the psychosocial considerations really about language and communication and support and interaction, and the empowerment that comes from making decisions at a time when you can receive information not like minutes before you have to decide to have a forceps or a cesarean. We talked about the experiences that people have had, and the wonderful projects that you've got coming up. So we'll make sure that we get in touch with you about those, and happy to spread the word. And and just heard about the rest of your story, which is great. And thank you for sharing the difficulties that it has been to go through and have another child, and the differences that just having some seemingly small changes have made a big difference in that second experience, and even the fact that you had major abdominal surgery, a cesarean section, and the ability to walk and push a pram a week later compared to, being wheeled around for 5 weeks 5 days in a wheelchair, and that was just in hospital, and then, difficulty walking for 6 weeks after that. That's pretty significant, and just the support in around you once you've had a baby is so important as well. Thank you very much for that time. And if this is Pop Awareness Month, what's a key message or a couple of key messages that you'd like to get out there, or reinforce that we've talked about already, to really wind up this last bit of the podcast? Any last words?
Pop month. So during this next month, we're going to be sharing lots of information, some snippets from that research that came out of Sweden, also sharing stories. And to anyone listening, if you follow the Australasian Birth Trauma Association Facebook page, please share any content that resonates with you, because you just don't know who you're helping, somebody that's suffering in silence. Really the big message is start the conversation. You just don't know who's living with this and thinking that it's normal, and potentially they could be getting help and be able to manage their symptoms. So we always say hashtag start the conversation, and keep the conversation going as well. Another one of our hashtags is break the silence, because there is such silence around talking about this women's health issue. And no offense, Anthony, but I honestly think that if something like this happened to men, there would be a fix for it right now. And, you know,
Not offended.
scarily, yeah, I know you wouldn't be, but you know, when all the issue with mesh came out, and it was well known that mesh was a problem, it never opened up the conversation. Nobody said, hang on a minute, why do women need surgery in their pelvic region? It just, nobody asked the question. So let's stop pop and ask the question. Start the conversation, break the silence. Please share our work so women know that there is support and help available, and that people are ready to help them. And last but not least, watch this space, because we are seeking funding right now to start a campaign that really supports the need of pelvic physios in the antenatal and postnatal period, because that is really important, we think, for birthing families moving forward. So watch this space, and I'll share that with you too if you'll have me.
Absolutely. I just have one last thing, and thank you so much, Amy, for your time. It's such a pleasure always to talk to you, and very nice to reminisce before we started about our lovely little chat in Melbourne.
Our little jaunt in Melbourne.
Few glasses of wine. How can we help you beyond obviously sharing the information, adding the hashtags? Is there anything that you would specifically like our community, and we've got a lot of health professionals and fitness professionals, is there anything else that we can do to support you?
We have, so on the new website, we've got downloadable resources, including the ABTA leaflet. That is available. You can download it yourself and print it off, or you can get in touch with us and we can send you the actual brochure coloured. And you know, what we need is people to hear about us, because at the moment we're still so small, nobody's heard about us. Second to that, there's a really great scheme that a local physio did in Brisbane, and I'll just put it out there, use it, don't use it, but she every time she got a referral from word of mouth, so every time one of her patients recommended her to one of their friends and then their friend came in, she would donate a small percentage to ABTA. Those little donations, they go a long way. We desperately want to train more peer mentors. We are looking to facilitate it. Originally, my big juicy goal was to have peer-to-peer meets, which is the support group, available in every state by the end of 2020. Obviously, COVID has put a little spanner in the works, but that is my big vision, and we're making the steps to actually really roll it out significantly in Queensland. But we really want to make this service available nationwide. It's a free service, but we need to train peer mentors and have peer facilitators, and in order to do that, we need funding. So whether it's donations from yourself, whether you've got connections that you think, oh, you know, that might be good for ABTA to know, all of those things make such a huge difference to such a small organisation that runs on very limited resources. So thanks for asking that question.
That's fantastic. You know, and if we ever monetize this podcast properly, ABTA is definitely on the list of organizations we are supporting, and it's great to finally have you on the podcast. And thank you very, very much for today, and we look forward to having you back on. It sounds like at least 2 more times you've booked yourself back in. So
easily we could probably bundle the next one up together if we're successful with the application. Watch this space.
We would love to be able to support you with that. And so thank you very much again for today, and we'll make sure all the details are on the website and in the various Facebook pages, all the social media, basically, wherever you consume this podcast. We'll make sure that that it's out there for ABTA, and please donate and support a wonderful cause. It's been wow, it must be like 3 years since we first met, maybe more.
No, it's not. It was not the last,
60.
the very last summer. No, when you came to Brisbane, it must have been.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know. Was Indy? How old was Indy? Do you remember?
Small.
Tiny small, was she?
Small, yeah.
So it was 2017 then, I reckon.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah.
Yeah.
She was small.
Yeah.
All right, fantastic.
She still is small, luckily.
Thank you so much, Amy. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.
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 Well, that's it for this episode. Be sure to hit like if you enjoyed the episode and leave any comments or questions below. We'd really like to hear from you.
If you haven't already hit subscribe, please do so now so that you can be kept notified when we release our next episode.
Otherwise, thank you for listening, and we look forward to having you back with us for another episode of the Women's Health Podcast.